The rain had stopped, but the cold still lingered in the air, the city streets slick with reflections from neon lights. Inside a trendy coffee shop, the aroma of roasted beans and baked pastries filled the space. People lined up, scrolling through their phones, chatting, laughing. Just another morning in the city. Jim Reynolds pulled open the door, stepping inside. Nobody noticed him, not at first. To them, he was just another old man, dressed in worn-out jeans, boots that had seen better days, and a faded Marine Corps cap pulled low over his graying hair. His flannel jacket hung loose on his wiry frame, the kind of man who had lived a full life but didn't care to show off what that life had been. Jim didn't come here for recognition. He just wanted a cup of coffee. He made his way to the counter, waiting patiently. The barista, a young man in his early 20s, name tag reading Kyle, stood behind the register, talking with another employee, laughing, scrolling on his phone. Jim waited and waited. A younger woman in business attire walked in behind him. Kyle immediately perked up. "Morning. What can I get started for you?" he asked her, flashing a fake customer service smile. Jim blinked. She had just walked in, but he said nothing, not yet. The woman ordered, paid, and stepped aside. Kyle still didn't acknowledge Jim. Jim cleared his throat. "Excuse me, son, can I get a coffee?" Kyle finally looked up, and the moment he really saw Jim, his expression shifted. The fake politeness, gone, the friendliness, evaporated. Kyle's lips curled in mild disgust, like he had just smelled something rotten. "Yeah, we're busy," Kyle muttered. "Hold on a sec." Jim glanced around. The shop wasn't busy. 3 other employees worked behind the counter, smiling, chatting, moving at a relaxed pace. Jim wasn't stupid. He knew exactly what this was. Minutes passed. Kyle took 3 more orders from customers who arrived after Jim. He never once looked Jim's way. Jim sighed. He'd seen worse. A lot worse. "Hey," he said again, voice calm. "Can I get a black coffee?" Kyle finally turned to him, bored and dismissive. "You sure?" Kyle smirked. "We got a lot of fancy options. Might be a little too strong for you." Jim didn't flinch. "Just coffee," he repeated. Kyle snorted. "Old school, huh?" Then, louder this time, so the nearby customers could hear. "Yeah, I don't know, man. We have the right to refuse service, and I don't really feel like serving you." Silence. Jim stared at him. The room shifted. A couple of customers looked up from their phones. One man sitting near the window, a businessman in his 30s, well-dressed, frowned. Jim exhaled through his nose. "Is that so?" Kyle shrugged. "No offense, but this isn't like a truck stop diner. You want coffee? Maybe try somewhere else?" His voice dripped with condescension. A few of the other employees chuckled behind him. Jim nodded slowly, took it all in. His grip tightened slightly around the brim of his Marine Corps cap. Then, without a word, he turned to leave. But before he reached the door, a stranger stood up. The coffee shop was dead silent. Every eye in the room was on Jim as he turned to leave, an old man walking away from an insult he didn't deserve. But before he could step out the door, a voice cut through the quiet. "Hey!" Jim paused. A man in his late 30s, sharp-dressed, well-built, with an air of quiet authority, had risen from his table near the window. His coffee sat untouched, his chair scraping against the tile as he moved. His name, if anyone cared to ask, was Ryan Carter. And right now, he wasn't about to let this slide. Ryan walked toward the counter, slow and deliberate, his eyes locked on Kyle, the smug barista still standing behind the register. "You really just refuse to serve that man?" Ryan asked, his voice calm but laced with steel. Kyle snorted, trying to brush it off. "Dude, chill. It's not that deep." Ryan stopped just a foot away from the counter. He wasn't big, but he carried himself in a way that made people straighten up. And Kyle was starting to feel it. "You know who that man is?" Ryan asked, voice quieter now. Kyle crossed his arms, feigning bored confidence. "Yeah, some cranky old dude who probably..." Ryan cut him off. "That old dude fought in Vietnam while your parents were still in grade school." Silence. Kyle blinked. "So?" Ryan's jaw tightened. "So, while you're standing here treating him like garbage, that man risked his life for your freedom. He fought for your right to stand behind this counter and act like a punk without consequence. The tension in the room thickened. Customers who had previously ignored the exchange were now paying attention. A young woman near the back, who had been scrolling on her phone, lowered it, eyes wide. Even some of Kyle's co-workers shifted uncomfortably. But Kyle, he rolled his eyes. Jesus, dude, you're making a big deal out of nothing. Ryan exhaled slowly, shaking his head. Then he reached into his back pocket, pulled out a wallet, and flipped it open. A military ID gleamed under the overhead lights. Ryan set it on the counter. I served two. Kyle's smirk vanished, and Ryan wasn't finished. You see this? Ryan said, tapping the ID. You know what it means? Kyle didn't answer. It means I know men like him. I know what they gave up. I know the brothers they buried. And I know they don't ask for much. Just a little respect, a little dignity. Ryan's voice never wavered. But you stand here treating him like he's beneath you, like you're better than him. Kyle shifted his weight. He looked around the coffee shop, realizing that every customer, every single one, was staring at him now. Even his co-workers were watching him differently, his face flushed. Dude, Ryan leaned in slightly. You're gonna fix this, he said. Not a threat, not a request, a fact. A woman near the counter crossed her arms. Yeah, this isn't right. A man sitting near the door nodded. You don't treat a veteran like that. Another customer shook his head. Unbelievable. Kid's got no respect. The room wasn't on Kyle's side anymore, and he knew it. Kyle gulped. He looked at his manager, a woman in her mid-40s who had been pretending not to listen. Now, she stepped forward, face tight with disappointment. Apologize, she told him. Kyle hesitated, then, voice barely above a whisper, Sorry, sir. Jim, who had been standing silent through it all, finally tilted his head. He stared at Kyle, his expression unreadable. Then, quietly, I don't need an apology, just a little more respect in this world. The words hung in the air. Kyle swallowed hard. And Jim? Jim turned, adjusting his Marine Corps cap, and walked back to the counter. Ryan smiled. His coffee is on me. Nah. He reached into his wallet and dropped a $20 bill onto the counter. And while you're at it, Ryan added, looking at Kyle, I suggest you take a good long look at yourself. Kyle nodded stiffly. Ryan didn't wait for a response. He turned to Jim, extended a hand. Thank you for your service, sir. Jim took it, gripping firmly. Likewise, son. The two men exchanged a nod, a moment of understanding that didn't need words. Jim picked up his coffee, took a slow sip, then gave Ryan one last look. You didn't have to do that. Ryan shrugged. I know. Jim smiled. That's what makes it matter. And with that, he walked out the door. The coffee shop was never quite the same after that day. Kyle never treated another customer the way he had treated Jim, because he would never forget what it felt like to be the one humiliated. The customers who had stood silent before, they left that day thinking about what it meant to stand up for someone else. And Ryan didn't need a thank you, because deep down, he knew. Sometimes, the best way to honor those who served is to remind the world that their sacrifice still matters.